In his essay about famous French sculptor François Root, Guillaume Apollinaire wrote that Root's sculptures are a representation of contemporary modern subjectivity. Apollinaire commented La Marseillaise by Root as a first work where the subject, the movement, and the life there is modern. Root invented a human of 20th century by composing him of a different heterogeneous elements made with materials unused before. The novelty in this type of art was strongly connected with the end of the time of marble and the age of stone. Root, according to Apollinaire, was the first sculptor who made an art whose subject, and here's a quote for Apollinaire, it means life and movement, imagination and sensibility, life which shapes its plasticity, end of quote. Is wholly found in the simple, strong and animated sculpture. Similar properties Apollinaire found in Cubist sculptures of Duchamp-Villon, whose art made a transgression of mimetic representation by going beyond imitation nature and offering new quality of sculpture connected with architecture. Apollinaire's comment of Duchamp-Villon sculptures emphasizes their uselessness, like useless are monuments, columns, and pyramids. Such sculptures are situated close to architecture, which, in opposite of the rest of art, can go beyond creating an illusion of nature. Cubist sculpture, which is in Apollinaire's art criticism treated as a synonym of perfect sculpture, offers a new order of reality by presenting us a sequence of different points of view or different positions of the image. As wrote Dale Cleaver, we often see a profile combined with a full face, the top and the side of a glass at the same time. The artist gives us more complete experience of the object. Thus, he develops a summary of experience from different moments in time and implies the relativity of time and space. In Apollinaire's lyrical strategies, this summary of experience from different moments in time is presented, for example, in a metaphor of exotic arts of Australia and Oceania in zone. Sculptors' fetishes of other religions are placed in different contexts by negation their primary position and putting them into contemporary world of zone's subject. Apollinaire suggests their difference or even alienation when he writes another shape, another fate, and inaccessibility as a result of such different meaning. Exotic sculptures cannot be measured, so perception of them can never reach their primary meaning given them by the source context. Sculptors confront their recipient with certain novelty, which was the main property of creativity as Apollinaire suggested in The New Spirit and the Poets. But this novelty is not accessible and possible to capture in the language of contemporary viewer. Ipso facto sculpture in zone articulate fundamental impossibility of reaching the origin. The memory of the subject who summons those artifacts is first of all a testimony of some contextual displacement which reduces hopes for the possibility of creating new and coherent reality. The metaphor of sculpture is here useful to approximate the specific meaning of relativity of time. The idea of novelty can be only created by removing artifacts from their previous context and putting them into some new contemporary moment of time. However, as such, sculptures stay irreducibly different and cannot be completely attached to the order of the new reality. Sculptures are symbols of the relativity of time, which, especially in Cubist zone, aims to create an illusion of objectivity by presenting figures in their totality. They represent time and space difference. But this totality is a fiction constructed by creating an entirely different present for the object, and this present cannot be coherent and fully understandable by the subject. Moreover, as claims Timothy Matthews in his reading Apollinaire, simultaneity is itself a fiction. Two points of view or multiplicity of aspects cannot be perceived simultaneously, but only sequentially. Apollinaire's thinking of sculpture as a metaphor of time is above all connected with the idea of novelty. In his art critic essays, he writes about Ruth, Archipenko, and Duchamp-Villon as the precursors of the new type of representation. Their sculptures represent not a perfect invariable beauty fixed outside the flux of time, as in Platonic philosophy of art, but captures the present transient moment and giving it the status of permanent. Sculpture, as Apollinaire wrote in his essay about Archipenko, can no longer avoid particularities of a given moment, but should create inner plastic reality, suggesting a fragment of life. These findings are consistent with Habermas's thesis about modernist transformation of art as a fixed, unchanging, and alienated from life into a discipline facing the life with all its uncertainty and randomness. In his critical essays on art, Apollinaire interest concentrates mainly on sculpture as a metaphor of modern time. But this is not the main problem of this speech. As I suggested in the theme, the subject of my interest is primarily sculpture presented in Apollinaire's short stories. This interest refers to Apollinaire's attraction to the Don Juan and Pygmalion legends, presented in Les Trois Don Juan and La Maricotte. Les Trois Don Juan, published in 1915, features the famous statue of Commander who is so realistic that seems to be alive. In this book, Apollinaire puts the sculpture in dialectic of movement and immobility. As in La Maricotte, where sculptor creates a perfect image of a woman and has realized that at the same time he has made his own portrait, who comes to life and starts to move around. In both texts, Apollinaire is primarily interested in dialectic of movement and solidity, which can be easily imposed on anthropomorphic statues. Illusion of movement contrasted with stone static can be translated as Eros Thanatos opposition, reflected in the fictional love stories. But there are not the only features of sculptures that Apollinaire used in his prose. Moving on from the metaphor of the statue towards the theme of the monument, the properties attributed to sculpture are changing. For Apollinaire, monument was connected with cutting off from the passage of time. Durability of such monument evokes certain ahistorical present, persistent object outside the stream of time. Monument should refer to such a historical fixation in order to transfer an event to the timeless, unchanging reality of memory. In Apollinaire's prose, interesting transformation of monuments metaphor is situated in one of the first two novels of 26 years old author, the 11,000 Trolls, an erotic story published anonymously. Apollinaire was then still to come authorship of all these commented earlier texts. However, the end of the novel brings some important recognitions anticipating the subsequent findings about sculpture and its relationship with literature. The story of love, or to be more precise, sexual affairs of the Romanian prince who comes to Paris to collect kinky adventures, ends with peculiar funerary monument erected on the initiative of prince's sexual companions. The monument is a statue of the prince on horseback, decorated with reliefs, depicting outstanding but fabricated heroic deeds of the deceased. Early action of this short novel is focused on the dynamics defined by subsequent acts of sexual multiplication, which leaves no scope for other stories. Monet Vibescu, the Romanian prince, is a hero only when he's unleashed eroticism, and without it he doesn't exist as a subject. Narrative structure is governed by the principle of free compilation of the following description of sexual acts between which there are no close relationship. Such construction reminds later simultaneous Apollinaire's poems and creates an illusion of total objective view of prince adventure, which are reduced only to sexual conquests. The whole chain of those conquests breaks not the death of the hero. After it, the other characters continue their erotic actions, but rather a special monument, which is the only fixed point of the story and its finish at the same time. Monument has to create illusion of prince as a hero by including on the reliefs images of his heroic deeds. This project is completed because people who look at the monument begin to fantasize about Prince's heroic life. But when they come closer, they can see an awkward epitaph. And here is the epitaph. Here lies the Prince Vibescu, the only lover of 11,000 rods. It would be better to deflower the 11,000 virgins. The contrast between monumentality of the whole statue, which from a distant view makes an illusion of heroic statue, from a closer perspective reveals obscenity. This obscenity is more pronounced because of being parody of epitaph's dignity. An art based of such parody is broken, and it is a sign of transgression of the monument logic. Rosalind Krauss suggests that paradigm joining sculpture and monument begins to pass at the end of the 19th century, when had appeared Rodin's The Gate of Hell and his monument to Balzac. Along with these sculptures, extremely subjective representation of Balzac and very decorative encrusted door to the Plant Museum of Art, we cross the logic of the monument and enter the space of negative image, the type of non-place and homelessness. Sculpture becomes a self-referential abstraction. Apollinaire followed the work of Rodin defending his monument to Balzac in the salons of 1898. Apollinaire admired extreme subjectivism and unconventional approach to the task of commemorating a great writer. So perhaps the textual monument of Prince Monet Vibescu, which is just only a small part of the whole story announced, changes in Apollinaire view of sculpture. That would be later developed in his critical writings. The monument of Prince Vibescu can be also treated as a prefiguration of Cubist reflections of artistic form in Apollinaire's thinking. This form gives an illusion of totality, for example, representation the whole life in one monument. In fact, turns out to be fiction, breaking reality on the individual pieces. If the 11,000 rods means crossing the logic of monument by its ridicule, then in a few years later, poet assassinated, this logic is completely negated. The monument that finished the history of Kronia Mantel, this is a hero from Poet Assassinated, is made from nothing. Initially, the hero friends are wondering that what would be the most perfect material to commemorate Kronia Mantel. They reject marble and bronze because that's old-fashioned materials. Sculptor who is going to make the monument says, I must model a profound statue of nothing, like poetry and glory. As a consequence of that decision, they create a monument which is a deep hole in the ground. The creator of this monument has put a lot of effort to design the interior of the monument so that they could filled up with Chroniomantal's spectre. Apollinaire finished the poet assassinated in 1916 when in sculptural theories appeals thinking about time and space as the main forms that constitute reality and at the same time as key categories of description of the sculptural form. The realistic manifesto written by Naum Gabo and Antoine Pevsner in 1920 stated that space cannot be measured or defined by solid masses. They preferred the use of transparent and translucent materials. In regard to time, they wrote that it must be expressed in sculpture through actual or illusionary motion. In Gabo's and Pevsner sculpture, we find the enveloping, expanding, transparent and translucent forms, which have no beginning and no ending, but instead a rhythmic continuity of form, which connected an artifact with the space of exhibition. This redefinition of concept of sculpture's solidity and durability makes its structure transhistorical and transspatial. Also quoted above, Rosalind Krauss' findings show that paradoxically, emphasizing temporality and spatiality of sculpture led to make them temporally and spatially non-defined. Chroniomantal monument is in fact the negation of the idea of monument because it uses as a material nothingness. It is an open sculpture, as open was sculpture of Boccioni, Gonzalez or Picasso, who between 1912 and 1917 opened their artifacts to show its interiors. Textual monument in the poet assassinated makes an illusion of total presence of the deceased, because it is filled by his spectre. Recognition of traditional sculptural materials as old-fashioned once again let us return to the concept of novelty. Sculpture of nothing has the paradoxical stages. On the one hand, it seems more real because it does not create monumental illusion based on material representation. On the other, it is a perfect illusion of presence because its transparent structure makes literal absorption of the dead into its interior. The monument has a structure open to the world, which can penetrate into it and affects its stability. The interference between the reality and the artifact is a next level of time in sculpture. Variable stream of time from the real world enters the artifact and prevents it from being eternal and fixed monument. Negativity of monument from nothingness is also condition for possibility of radical openness to the world, in which temporal distinctions are annulled. For Apollinaire, this radical openness was a crucial feature of writing subject, who should open his subjectivity for reality. Passing from the closed surface of the block, which has symbolic and material possibilities of closing and creating autonomous reality, to vacuum monument, which is negativity of sculpture, also sets change of thinking about subject's memory, which is present in the artifact. The sculpture of nothingness, open to reality, allows subject to survive as a vacuum, which is filled by the content of the reality. Such construction, the subject, the artifact, and the reality, begins to form constant totality. Novelty in this case is determined by removing the frame which separates those three components. Subject, which is constructed as an effect of those removing, is becoming more transparent and open to all the things, symbols, and meanings.
Katarzyna, you have come to conclusion.
Last sentence. Negativity of monument from nothingness becomes requirement of openness to reality, in which temporal distinctions are suspended. As in the hills where Apollinaire, maybe a few.
Okay.
As in the hills where Apollinaire wrote, The helping spirits are wandering when they are waiting among us, since the time to join us, there are no ends, no beginning. Due to this suspension, the duration of the work and its continuous novelty is possible. However, the subject that exists in such work manifests itself only as the air, adopting the shape of what he penetrates into. As I try to show, sculpture in Apollinaire two stories, treated as a metaphor of time, allows to recognize not only the concept of novelty based on breaking a time division, but also the condition of the subject, which has absorbed into itself both past, present, and future.